WisconsinEye's 2014 election coverage is brought to you by the Wisconsin Hospital Association. For over 90 years, a valued voice for Wisconsin hospitals, supporting high-quality, high-value care in communities like yours.
WisconsinEye coverage of the 2014 elections continues with an interview with Dane County DA Ismael Ozanne. He's one of 3 Democratic candidates for Attorney General. Ismael, welcome back to WisconsinEye.
Thank you for having me.
Programming note, WisconsinEye appreciates the support of the Wisconsin Hospital Association, which represents more than 139 hospitals and health systems, for making these candidate interviews possible. Let's start out. What's your definition of the job of AG? I often hear this term, top cop. Is it just that, or does it go beyond that, Ishmael?
Well, I think the Attorney General is the people's attorney, and that is key. Obviously, public safety is number one, and I will say this, that WPPA's poll even shows that public safety is number one with Wisconsinites, and I think that's why Wisconsinites expect and deserve their Attorney General to be a frontline prosecutor, because public safety is integral in what government does. I think that's probably the main role of government, is public safety. But that said, the Attorney General must do entirely more than just public safety. You have to make sure that women have the ability to make their own healthcare decisions. You have to stop voter suppression. You have to make sure that we protect our environment and protect our consumers and our seniors. We can have no second-class citizens in the state of Wisconsin, and that is a key role for the Attorney General, to be able to stand up and fight for the citizens of the state of Wisconsin.
Now, you've got a primary, and if you win that, you go on to November. But the incumbent Attorney General, J.B. Van Hollen, has said he believes that it's the duty of the Attorney General to defend laws passed, even constitutional amendments. If you are Attorney General and you think something is clearly unconstitutional, would you not defend those, sir?
Well, I think you're bound not to defend something that's unconstitutional. You take an oath to defend the Constitution of the United States and the state of Wisconsin. So therefore, if something is unconstitutional, I think that goes against your oath to stand up and defend something that's unconstitutional.
So you would not have gone to court? Go ahead, excuse me.
Now, what I will say is this. The Attorney General their job is to represent the state of Wisconsin. And I think in the best way to describe that for you and for others is there has to be a good faith legal basis for the Attorney General to defend the state. Now, if the Attorney General, if there is no good faith legal basis to defend it, I guess the Attorney General could work to settle the case. But obviously, the governor or the legislature could hire special counsel to defend something that they disagreed with the Attorney General on. Now, I will say this. If you look at our history, we used to house at one point up to 6,000 inmates outside of state in private institutions and other state-run institutions for other states. I don't agree with that. I believe that that policy is contrary to public safety. I don't think it helps keep our community safe. I don't think it makes us better. But if I had to defend that policy, I would have to defend it, because it is the state's right to contract for those services. So I couldn't, just because I don't agree with that position or that policy, not defend that.
But you would not have defended the challenge to our constitutional prohibition on same-sex marriage, correct?
That is, in a sense, state-sponsored discrimination. Okay. And no, I would not defend that.
And photo ID, would you have defended that?
No, that too. We must be very careful when we put hurdles in front of people's ability to exercise their most essential right. And voter suppression is something we have to fight against every single day. We got to remember, freedom isn't free. And each generation must stand up and sacrifice and fight to ensure the freedoms that they have had are also there for the next generation.
If you're Attorney General and the ledge and the governor pass a bill or a law that you think is unconstitutional, and you say, you believe it to be unconstitutional, then who defends the state interests in that scenario?
Well, in that scenario, if the other bodies of government feel that their position is correct, and they can hire special counsel. That's the beauty of our system. Our system, the Attorney General is not tucked under the executive like in the federal system. The Attorney General here stands alone and is truly the citizen's attorney and should be accountable only to the citizens of the state of Wisconsin.
But I've often wondered, why is it that the Attorney General, whether it's a D or an R in the past, has had to get sign-off from the governor to hire a special prosecutor? Isn't that one way? Doesn't that make the governor a final authority over issues that should be investigated, sir?
Well, that would depend on whether or not there's a conflict. I think if the Attorney General just says, listen, I am not going to be able to defend this because, one, it's unconstitutional, and two, it's just plain wrong, then the governor has the ability to hire special counsel on their own. And the legislature could request to hire special counsel in those situations.
Okay. I've been looking forward to this interview because I took a lot of notes at your speech at the State Democratic Convention. And there's a phrase I'm going to ask you to explain, and I think it deals with your former number 2 at the Department of Corrections.
Deputy Secretary?
Deputy Secretary. Wisconsin is best for being worst. And then I have a question mark in my notes. Please explain that.
Right now, if you looked at some of the reports from the Pew Foundation and others, they were listing Wisconsin as, yes, the best for being the worst for opportunities for achievement for children of color, the worst for racial disparities. Those numbers and those rankings, at least for the opportunities for children of color, have just recently come out. In Dane County itself, we just had the Race to Equity report come out, talking about disproportionate number of children of color living under the poverty line in Dane County. I believe that was 75% versus 5% for Caucasian children. So the reality is there, and I think we need to address it. Because what that disparity does, it creates a situation where victims and witnesses don't fully cooperate with the system because they see it as being unfair. It creates a psychological out for some defendants to say they should be able to do whatever they want because the system isn't fair. And the system, to truly protect us all, has to work for us all. Now, that we can't change the system from the back forward. We have to work from the front to the back as well. So we have to talk about, what it means to keep our community safe. Now, I'll be the first one to say this. If you create a serious offense or a violent crime, you should go to prison. That said, if we can get to the root cause of what brings somebody to the system, whether it's mental health or whether it's addiction, we should do so in a meaningful way. And that is what's really going to keep us safe.
When you use the phrase best for being worse, I thought you were alluding to the fact that tragically Wisconsin leads the nation in the incarceration of African Americans, doesn't it?
That was the second part, the disproportionate number of people within the system.
Why do we lead the nation in the incarceration of African Americans, and does that fall within the job description of Attorney General, sir?
Well, yes, the Attorney General needs to talk about best practices, training for law enforcement, and talk about what truly keeps our community safe. Now, if you look at our system, truth in sentencing was 2 parts. And the second part was sentencing guidelines, and the sentencing guidelines did not pass. Right. And I think that's, because sometimes we are compared to Minnesota. That is one of the biggest differences between Minnesota and Wisconsin. Not the population, not the demographics, but the fact that we don't have sentencing guidelines for our system. Now, I'd be the first one to defend judicial discretion and prosecutorial discretion, because I think it allows that discretion allows the system to actually make the tough decisions and keep people out of the system where possible, if needed.
Attorney General cannot, as you know, cannot sponsor any law, but can make recommendations to the governor or the legislature. Would you recommend that the truth in sentencing guidelines finally be passed? Because you're right, they never were.
Well, that was one thing. But what we did under Governor Doyle? We did pass the Act 28 sentencing reforms, and that truly made a difference. We worked on them, we passed them, and we actually implemented them. This last administration ripped them out as quickly as possible, but that was making a difference. Now, right before that, obviously Governor Doyle commissioned a racial disparities study. Yes. For the state. That came out, that focused a lot on the criminal justice system. We worked with Justice Reinvestment Project, and Senator Lena Taylor was key in that effort as well with the Pew Foundation. And I believe at that point the Pew Foundation came out with 1 in 100 for the United States of people that were within the system, either incarcerated or on supervision. When you looked at Wisconsin in general, specifically, I believe that number from the Pew Foundation was 1 in 33. And what that tells you is that it's not just persons of color. Now, persons of color are within the system, but that means everybody. Everybody in Wisconsin knows somebody or is affected by someone who is either incarcerated or on supervision. And I think people were ready for a change. That's why we were able to pass the Act 28 sentencing reforms. That's why we were able to implement them. And we got some of the greatest support for those sentencing reforms in some of the most conservative pockets within this state.
You must have been drawing on your experience at the Department of Corrections when you told the Democratic Convention this, quote, "It's not all about putting people in prison," close quote. Put that in context.
Well, when you talk about what keeps us safe or what makes safer communities, it isn't just warehousing people. If you don't take advantage of the time either when you have somebody within the institution or on supervision to create positive change within that person, you have not made the community safer. 97% of the people we have incarcerated within our prison system that are actually housed in an institution will come back to our communities at some point in time. And if we have not made positive change within that person, we have not made ourselves safer. And we have spent entirely too much money to not make ourselves safer.
You also talk about the iron mine for Ashland and Iron County. You said in your speech, the mine will be 1.5 miles wide. It would be atop a watershed. Are you saying the mine shouldn't be built, Ismael?
What I'm saying is this. We must protect our clean air and clean water. And right now we sit on the most valuable resource known to humanity, fresh water. I believe 25% of the world's fresh water is here within the Midwest. That mine, right now, the way it's proposed, 1.5 miles wide, 1,000 feet deep, that would stretch from the east side of Madison to Johnson's Creek, sitting on top of a watershed that feeds into the world's largest fresh body of water. We have to make sure we protect water. We have to make sure that we do not do something that will destroy our community, our chances for the next generation and the generations to come, to enjoy what we have, and that is pristine country up there. Now, I am not saying that you can't mine. But what this legislature has done is they've made it easier for special interests to take our resources and pollute without being held accountable. Now, they've also taken away local control of those communities who are at ground zero in those situations, who would be able to balance development and protection of the environment. And I think you need to have local control. You need to have people, boots on the ground, who are able to say, listen, are you doing best practices to protect our environment and protect our health? And that's what has to happen. Now, if you would ask me personally, do I think we should have an open pit mine in that situation flowing into the world's largest fresh body of water? I don't believe we can afford that. That said, I can't say that mining isn't something that would be in Wisconsin's history. My grandfather wrote books on Wisconsin labor history and talked about, mining as an industry that is something that you can't just easily pick up and take out of the state. But you definitely have to protect the environment, because it does no good to create however many jobs you think you're going to create, but then leave us with cancer and devastation from pollutants for a lifetime.
Just to follow up on that, you said in the speech that you would go back to creating the public intervener. Could you do that internally, or would you need the permission of the Leg and Gov to do that?
Obviously, I'd be requesting that they reinstate that portion of the Department of Justice, but I believe the Attorney General has the ability to act already. Okay. You have the ability to initiate action in antitrust, consumer protection, and public nuisance, which would be the environment. And I believe our Attorney General's office can and should act aggressively to protect our environment.
All three candidates, all four, are talking about the epidemic of heroin abuse. What are your thoughts on how to fight that, sir?
Well, this isn't something that we can prosecute our way out of. Heroin is destroying our families from within in every community, at every socioeconomic level. People are dying. and we here in Dane County have been battling this as long, if not longer, than many other communities. Now, I think we need to understand this as well. When we are talking about prosecuting somebody for a heroin overdose or death, that's a reckless homicide. And many times, what people need to understand is we are prosecuting somebody who had a hand in the death of someone they knew, they may have grown up with, that may have been their significant other. These are cases, it's not always a situation where you have what people would typically consider a drug dealer being at risk for prosecution of a reckless homicide. That said, I think we need to be sure about how we're addressing this danger. And we don't know how big this problem is. And the reason we don't know is because people are being introduced through legitimate means. People are being introduced through doctors' prescriptions for sports injuries, car accidents, pain management. And before they know it, they may be addicted. And what we have to do is educate the community. We have to talk to doctors. We have to talk to insurers. One thing we're doing here in Dane County, we've partnered our office, our crisis response, worked with parents to create a website for information for parents, because they don't get the ability to confer with prosecutors because they are not considered victims within the system. We have worked with safe communities to talk to physicians about how they prescribe pain medications and how are they communicating regarding drug-seeking behavior or people who are all of a sudden missing a full prescription a day after they just filled the prescription, so that they can communicate better on, is there someone that actually is having or developing a problem with addiction. Okay. And if we can address that, we should do so in a meaningful way and keep these people out of the system.
Okay. Series of questions based on both my interviews with your two primary opponents and your speech. Is it fair to say you believe that first offense drunken driving should be a crime, Ismael?
What I've said from the very beginning, and I believe I am the only one that has never changed my position on this, is that, listen, the behavior is so dangerous. I, in good conscience, cannot say it should not be criminal. Now, I've heard things that have literally astonished me, that it will cost too much money. I don't know what price people put on the mother or child that are killed, who are rear-ended or hit head-on. I think Wisconsin, what you are seeing is a shift. I think people truly are shifting in their culture, in our beliefs. And we are no longer accepting of losing lives senselessly on our roads just because of someone making the conscious decision to drive while under the influence.
Next question. Who or what is to blame when a 10-year-old girl playing at the Clark Street Elementary in Milwaukee is shot in the head? What does that tell us about violence and how to fight urban violence anywhere, urban, rural?
Any loss of life, we should try and learn from, and we should try and address. But I think right now what you're seeing in some communities with gun violence really is talking about violence within our community and violence within our society. And if we're going to really have an ability to change that, we have to start talking about protecting kids and ending violence in our homes. And right now what we are talking about in Dane County is looking at making sure we protect all children. And if we can, try and give parents all the information about early brain development and about nonviolent parenting. And I think truly, if we want to have a difference and a true impact on things like the educational achievement gap, on violence in our communities as a whole, we have to start talking about raising our kids with empathy and making sure that they grow up with empathy so that when they reach adulthood or early teens, that they have empathy for others and they aren't just willing to go out and do anything because they don't care about the consequences other than getting what it is they perceive they want.
I've been able to interview Chief Flynn in Milwaukee 2 or 3 times over the last year. In every interview he said we have to close loopholes, criminals in possessions of guns. Mm-hmm. What are those loopholes, and do you support closing them to try to avoid this increased violence? Mayor Barrett just says yesterday he's worried about this summer being very violent. But have you talked to Chief Flynn about what loopholes and should they be closed?
Well, I think, and I have not spoken directly with Chief Flynn, but I think what he was talking about were straw purchases, where someone who has the ability to purchase a firearm does so in a legitimate means, but then passes that on, or the ability for someone to have a personal sale of a firearm and that they are moving it without a background check. I would support background checks, but we also have to make sure that when we're talking about gun violence within our communities, that we also talk about education. And we have a lot of situations where children are hurt by firearms because they find them in the home and they think that they're unloaded, or they think they're toys. So we need education there as well. Now, I think when you're talking about in Milwaukee, what they are dealing with, the gun violence they're experiencing. I've been there a couple times lately, and they are, as a community, talking about this as being a time when they're going to start burying their youth, burying young men and women. But I think we have an opportunity. Chief Flynn also spoke at one of Mayor Barrett's forums about knowing 90% of the people they're going to be looking for involved in these incidents have histories with the criminal justice system. They know who they are. And 60 to 70%, I believe, and don't hold me to that number, of the victims also have contact with the criminal justice system. So they also know who they are. If you know who is likely to be involved, that begs the question, shouldn't we be able to have an intervention? And I think what we are doing here in Dane County to deal with our violent offenders, which partnering with the City of Madison Police Department on their Special Investigations Unit, it has brought together law enforcement from the U.S. Attorney, my office, the Sheriff, other local law enforcement, U.S. Marshals, to come in and bring in some of our most violent offenders and notify them. There will be no more violent acts allowed from you. Mm-hmm. And if you commit another violent offense, we will prosecute you to the fullest and ask for the maximum penalty. But the power of the program is the number of community providers that we have that are standing alongside law enforcement and saying to these offenders, no more violence. But we're here to help you. We are here to help connect you to resources, whether it be stable housing, whether it be education, whether it be mental health counseling, whatever it is that's been a hurdle to get you to be a productive member of our community. We're here to help you connect to those resources. So the community is actually being proactive along with law enforcement and focusing resources on those offenders with a proven history of victimizing the community. Now, focused deterrence, which is this is a model of, has been credited in Boston, Philadelphia, and Baton Rouge, and some of those communities dropping their homicide rates by 20%. I believe we could create a focused deterrence model in Milwaukee that could help address gang violence, gun violence, violence within the community, and have a great impact. And we, I think, are obligated to do whatever we can to have an intervention so that we can make sure that these deaths are not occurring senselessly.
I've been in press conferences with Assembly Speaker Voss in which he suggests that the John Doe system may be broken. He's used his term, witch hunt's not mine. Is the John Doe system, does it need to be fixed? Is it broken?
I don't believe it's broken.
Okay.
I believe it is a tool for law enforcement, and it's a way in which to investigate crimes. Mm-hmm. The John Doe system is started. You need to ask permission from a judge, and you have a judge that oversees that. I guess you could talk about a grand jury system, which you have in the federal system, and which this state had at a point in time in its history.
Yes. Some candidates are saying medical marijuana should be legalized. Your position? Are you afraid that would open the door to other?
Well, you know, legalization of marijuana, I think that is clearly a legislative issue, and our legislature should take it up. The nice thing is that we have Colorado and Washington.
Just for medicine, or the recreational that we see in Colorado and state of Washington?
I would say this: legalization of marijuana, for whatever purpose, needs to be taken up by the legislature. It's a legislative issue, and what we do have is Colorado and Washington, which we can learn from and watch as they move through this process. What we do see, boots on the ground right now, with trafficking of marijuana, we see armed home invasions, armed robberies, and murders, and that's what's happening here in Dane County. It's a very serious public safety issue and law enforcement issue right now, and I would say this, that you know, it's no longer the same as it was before. We are seeing large amounts of marijuana being shipped in from out of state. I believe task force within just Dane County has had seizures of 90 pounds to upwards of 100 pounds at a time. And there is a very high profit margin within the trafficking of THC, and that's why I think there is a lot of violence and firearms involved.
If you legalize medical marijuana, are you afraid that that would lead to even more shipments and more abuse of it, Ismael?
You know, I can't say that because I don't know what regulations and what processes they would go through to regulate and distribute medical marijuana if they were to do so. And that, I think you would need to talk to the medical profession as to how they would see distribution and in what form I guess the THC would be produced.
This tragic case in Waukesha County has raised this question: should 12-year-olds be tried as adults?
Well, what you have to look at when you are talking about a violation of the law, you have to look at the severity and the seriousness. And especially when you're talking about juveniles, you need to look at the juvenile system and ask, does the juvenile system have the capacity to manage and address the issue at hand? And when you're looking at the juvenile system, you're also looking at a system that is going to be constrained by time. Because at some level, the person, if you try them just as a juvenile, will age out of the juvenile system. And that is a situation where, you know, if we have a very serious crime, as a prosecutor, your question might be, this has to be addressed in the adult court. The violation is just so serious, the loss of life or the almost loss of life, and that case then is charged out on the adult side, and you're looking to move the person in. Now, that isn't to say that the court will not move that case back into the juvenile system. But that's a question where you will have both sides put forward what the benefits and the constraints of the system are, whether it's juvenile or whether it's adult. Now, there's been a discussion here of late, should 17-year-olds be moved back into the juvenile system?
That's right, I was going to ask you about that, because Representative Fred Kessler says we got it wrong 20 years ago when they allowed 17 to be waived into adult court. But I'm sorry, I interrupted you.
No, that's quite all right.
Should we go back to that?
Well, what you have to ask at that point is, can the juvenile system address whatever violation there is if the person is 17 within a year? Unless the juvenile is considered a serious juvenile offender, the juvenile system is going to release basically jurisdiction over that individual. Yes. When they are no longer a juvenile. Now, I'm not saying that you shouldn't have 17-year-olds move back into the juvenile system for some offenses. But what we're doing in Dane County, to look at that issue, should you treat a juvenile, someone who hasn't even had the ability to exercise their most essential right, which is the right to vote, as an adult? We're creating a youthful offender community restorative court. For 17 to 25-year-olds, law enforcement can refer them straight to this community restorative court, and if they successfully complete whatever that is, restitution, education, counseling, whatever it is they need to do, if they successfully complete that program, there is no actual entry into the criminal justice system. There is no entry into CCAP. There is no creation of a criminal record that will follow them the rest of their life. They will have earned the right to enter adulthood without a criminal conviction that will follow them the rest of their life. And I think that is a way we have to seriously look at who's coming into the system, who's being brought in, and if we can do so in a meaningful way and keep the community safe by addressing those situations outside of the criminal justice system, I think we should.
Okay, we're almost out of time, so I just have two more quick questions. Can you tell me the toughest call you've had to make as Dane County DA? Anything come to mind? And if not, I'll ask my last question.
I won't say that there's any tough situations. You know, I was asked, obviously, I addressed the open meetings law violation.
Yes.
And I was asked, did you ever, you know, after this
just some
had
background.
passed.
You went to you argued before the state Supreme Court that Act 10 was passed illegally in violation of the open meetings law.
Yes.
Excuse me.
Yes.
Just want to provide the context. Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you. And I was asked at a later point, did you ever consider resources? Obviously, we're operating at 1985 staffing levels within the Dane County DA's office. And in that litigation alone, we went up, in a sense, against the Attorney General's office and I believe one of the largest private law firms the state has as well, assisting the Attorney General's office. That, to me, was not a tough question. It was the right thing to do. It was about making sure the citizens have access to their own government. It was about making sure those who write the laws are also accountable to the laws. It was a serious legal endeavor that, in a sense, moved very quickly through the system and got in front of the Supreme Court, which has now become our Supreme Court's longest oral argument in history of the state. But it was the right thing to do. So that question for me was not a hard one. It was not one that I even sort of said, do we have the ability to do this? It was, we must do this. And we did. It was not partisan. We did not talk about the merits of the law in any way, shape, or form in our...
You focused on the process.
We focused truly on the process, and the shame of that 3-4 decision was that, you know, not only did it throw out 30 years of open government in the state's history, it turned Wisconsinites against Wisconsinites. And that's truly the shame of what happened there. It hurt workers and it hurt our economy. But those were things that we did not address. We did not bring that up. I did not talk about my thoughts of the law at all. We looked at process because, you know what is essential to our form of government and our way of life is notice and access. And you must have notice in order to have access.
Then my final question, do you want to highlight any differences between you and your two opponents in the primary?
Well, you know, I don't necessarily highlight differences. I just talk about my strengths. And right now, it's clear. My leadership and experience set me apart from Democrat or Republican in this race. I am the only one that has experience heading the day-to-day operations of a statewide agency. And not any statewide agency, the largest one we have. That had 10,000 employees and a budget of $1.2 billion when I was deputy secretary. It talks, when you talk about leadership, you know, and experience, I've argued in front of the Supreme Court on behalf of all the citizens of the state of Wisconsin. I can say truly, I'm firmly planted as being a frontline prosecutor that I think Wisconsinites expect and deserve their Attorney General to be, as well as having a proven track record of standing up for the citizens of the state of Wisconsin and making sure that we have, hopefully, no second-class citizens in the state of Wisconsin. I think citizens don't have to expect or wonder what it would be like to have me as their Attorney General. They can look at what I'm doing in Dane County, they can look at what I've done, and they can know what it'll be like to have me as their Attorney General.
Thank you. Dane County DA Ismael Ozanne is one of 3 Democrats running in the August 12th primary for Attorney General. Ismael, thanks for talking to WisconsinEye.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.